there are fears that Labour could hand money to countries that are guilty of human rights abuses. We're going to read into this exclusive from The Independent, you guys. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Reganelite here with an exclusive from The Independent with the headline that there are fears Labour could hand money to countries guilty of human rights abuses. The exclusive reveals that Labour risks rubber stamping the last government's deeply flawed human rights policy, despite heavy criticism of the approach. Guys, while you're here, make sure you hit the like button and share it across social media so others are notified of this video. So there's a couple of factors in this, guys, that we need to consider first and foremost. Now, there is, of course, the moral high ground, which I'm sure the majority of you are with, that we believe that everyone should be having the same human rights, that people should not be treated indifferently, people should not be abused simply because of whether it is religious, sex, nationality, skin colour, disabilities that they may or may not have, whatever those reasons. Everyone should have human rights, everyone should be treated equally and fairly in society. I think we all agree with that, but there is this moral compass that we have within us. And obviously, the vast majority of people in society, I mean, prime example is what's happening in Gaza. What's happening there is absolutely atrocious. What Israel are doing there is outrageous, because from a moral point of view, we are still supporting Israel despite human rights abuses clearly being abused inside Gaza. The countless videos and whatnot are there. So countless videos and photos of what's happening there is clear for all of us to see. However, there is also another factor when you think about this. You're taking aside the moral high ground, and that is influence. Influence is a really powerful thing. If there's one thing that this government, that the UK doesn't have as much as it used to, and that is influence. Now, it may seem morally wrong to hand money to countries guilty of human rights abuses, but there is this part that in doing so, it also gives them influence, or perhaps gives them access to something that other nations do not by doing so. Is it right? No, absolutely not. But one thing that the UK government needs to have is more influence. They don't have the same influence that they used to have, because quite rightly, it may not come as a surprise to you, but we had a lot of influence when we were part of the European Union. We had a lot of influence because we were one of the top dogs in the European Union. And that meant that when we got round the table with non-EU countries, we had a bit of political sway on a lot of countries as well. Don't have that anymore. So in some of these countries where we know that there are human rights being abuses, in certain countries, maybe in the Middle East and Africa, certain parts of the Middle East and Africa, for example, where we know some women are not treated as equally as men. Don't agree with it whatsoever, because I believe women should have the same rights and equalities as men. But we also know that if we want to have some influence in some of these parts of the world, money needs to be transferred. I think you know where I'm coming from there. Do I like it? Do I agree with it? No. But there is that influence that matters as well. So on one hand, I'm totally against this idea of handing money to countries guilty of human rights abuses, because from a moral perspective of where I stand. However, also there is this factor of having influence over other governments and nations that could benefit the UK in the long term. So that's kind of where I stand on it, guys. So let's have a reader into it. So there are growing fears that the government is preparing to greenlight the continued provision of financial assistance to countries that have overseen appalling human rights abuses, despite previously being extremely critical of the policy. And it comes as a review into human rights abuses overseas is seemingly turning into a rubber stamping process with no consultation on major campaign groups having taken place. The government's review of the UK's Overseas Security and Justice Assistance, the OSJA, which was launched by the previous Tory administration, is designed to prevent UK assistance from contributing to human rights abuses abroad. And this sounds very, very weak, because a lot of nations may be a case of they will ignore it because they need to have a relationship with this country, despite this country in particular has human rights abuses under its watch, for example. But again, it's not right, but that will be the position by some countries that relate on a relationship that we have with them. UK current policy does not explicitly prohibit British involvement in countries that are accused of human rights abuses, including the death penalty and torture. The guidance currently acknowledges that it is important that we work with a wide range of countries, including territories in which the UK has concerns about human rights. So the wording there is very concerned about human rights. See what they did there. While Labour took a strong stance on the issue while it was in opposition in 2020, calling for a review, campaign groups have now warned that the probe in which Labour has taken over from the Tories risks rubber stamping the last government's deeply flawed human rights policy. In a letter to Foreign Secretary seen by The Independent, a coalition of NGOs, including Amnesty, Liberty, Freedom from Torture and Redress, has warned that it appears to have been conducted in a hurry with too little consultation. While the FCDO has stressed that its review is still ongoing, the department will not specify how much longer it will run for. In December 2023, Baroness Swinburne, responding on behalf of the then government, said the OSJA guidance will be updated shortly and will reflect the views of a broad range of shareholders. But it is understood no civil society groups with an interest in this area of policy have so far been consulted. The Green MP Ellie Chance, who sits on the human rights group of cross-party MPs, told The Independent the OSJA guidance seemingly falls well short of its aims to prevent complicity in human rights abuses abroad. She called for the government to put in place watertight, consistently applied guidance to restore the UK's reputation globally and to give the public assurances that our government is not complicit in human rights abuses anywhere in the world. The letter says in opposition, the Labour Party was sharply critical of the profound shortcomings of the OSJA. This review appears to have been conducted in a hurry with too little consultation and risks rubber stamping the last government's deeply flawed human rights policy. We urge your government to conduct a proper review which addresses the loopholes in the guidance as well as limited application and total lack of transparency. We urge you to begin by inviting a public consultation as part of that process. This is an opportunity for the UK government to restore Britain's reputation as a global leader in human rights and international development. And this is also another thing. While you can buy influence on countries with human rights abuses, you could not do that and actually stand up and say, no, we're not going to work with you because we stand on behalf of people with on those on human rights and international development. So there is that point as well. Since 2017, the UK's OSJA policy has repeatedly failed to prevent the UK aid from benefiting human rights abuses. The campaign groups warn, adding that recipients of assistance, including Bahrain's Justice and Secretary and Security sector through the Gulf Strategy Fund, even while the Bahrain judiciary continues to admit confessions acquired through torture. In Bahrain, such evidence has been used to sentence people to death, such as in the case of peaceful protester Mohammed Raudim and Hassan Muda, who were given death sentences after being tortured. In 2020, Labour Foreign Affairs spokesperson Stephen Tory asked the government to freeze assistance to bodies complicit in Mr. Mahmoud and Mr. Hassan's torture, and asked the government to publish its relevant OSJA assessments for public scrutiny. Meanwhile, the then Shadow Minister for Middle East, Sir Wayne David, expressed dismay that the government did not bother to implement their own policy by consistently carrying out OSJA assessments. The previous government also spent millions of pounds supporting Pakistan's anti-terrorism courts, which sentenced more than 350 people to death between 2013 and 2018, according to figures from Reprieve. And earlier this year, the previous government concluded an agreement with the Libyan authorities to hand £1 million to the country's law enforcement to stop people entering Europe by crossing the Mediterranean Sea. This is exactly what European countries, the EU, are doing as well. So their human rights are not squeaky clean either. It came despite reports from the UN's independent fact-finding mission on Libya in 2023 that Libya law enforcement, including the Coast Guards and the Directorate for Combating Illegal Migration, had committed human rights violations against migrants in detention that could amount to crimes against humanity. An FCDO spokesperson said that the department is currently reviewing the government's guidance for the OSJA assessments. And while we plan to engage with internal stakeholders as part of the review, recognising the important perspective of civil society, the guidance will set out on how we ensure that the UK's overseas security and justice assistance work will meet our human rights obligations and values. There will never be a case where they will get this completely right, because there will be cases where they will turn a blind eye to it, and there will be cases where they will call out for it, and we will scream hypocrisy. And that's going to happen. Is it right? No. Should it all be the same? Yes. Is it going to be? No. So, I know I hate like this. It feels like a dead. A part of me feels like it's a dead discussion, because it's like, well, you're not going to get this with. There are certain nations, like for example China, right? Like, are we going to blast China? Are we going to stop trading and having and whatnot with China because we know that have had human rights abuses in the past? Are we going to say something about China, for example? No, of course not, because they're one of the biggest economies in the world. Do we approve of what America is doing with the use of the death penalty in that country? Should we stop associating ourselves with America because of the death penalty there? No. We don't believe in it. We don't think it's right to do so. This is a situation that we find ourselves in. So I do think Labour will hand money to countries guilty of human rights abuses. I don't agree with it. I think it's morally wrong, but I believe that's what they will do in the end anyway. And we won't hear a lot about it unless people chase it up like The Independent has done here. But yeah, if Labour want to represent UK on the grand stage, I think they are. For most of the parts since they've been coming power, they've done okay. I'm not going to say they've done great, and I'm not going to say they've done terribly in terms of a representation on the international stage. They've been far more respected than Rishi Sunak has been, I will say, on that. But yeah, it's not good whatsoever. But what do you guys honestly think about this story? What do you guys think about human rights abuses? What do you think about not just British government, but maybe other governments in general, and the relationships that they have with other international countries? Do you understand why I am not completely on board with while I am from a morally perspective, obviously in favour of us not having any relationship with any human rights abusers? You could also understand why why countries like the UK and maybe others also have agreements with countries of human rights abuses. Let me know your thoughts and more about all these down in the comment section below. If you found this video informative, please hit the like button. We greatly appreciate it. Share it across social media so others are notified of this video. If you haven't subscribed already, please consider subscribing, because it really does help support the channel. If you want to go one step further and financially support me and the work that I do here, you can do so by becoming a YouTube member for as little as 99p, or you can join me on Rumble or Patreon for exclusive content on those platforms. So thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to catch you all very, very soon.